gearbox, and some people will say, well, it's on stilts, how can that be reliable and all that? But obviously, if you have more than 3 standoffs, it's extremely rigid. And the design doesn't rely on the standoffs for it to be centered on the engine. It's kind of like we use a throwaway Dalaran sleeve that gets placed on the bottom gear and then goes into the crankshaft, and that's what centers it within half a thousandths. So it's a disposable part. If you ever take the gearbox off, you put a new centering bushing, we call it. So that's a different way of aligning something rather than using dowel pins and things like that. And then makes everything more universal. The same gearbox with a just slightly different back housing can go on different engines and so forth and so on.
What we're used to the term TBO, which we know, experimental world. It's a recommendation only. What are you recommending on this? And is it a different time period for the reduction gearbox versus the engine?
Yeah, the gearbox is just like on demand. You know, you have a sight glass, you change the oil, you can read the temperature of the gearbox as you're flying. If one day comes along where you're reading a little bit higher temperatures than you used to, and you drain it and there's a little bit of metal on the drain plug, on the magnetic drain plug, then maybe it's time for the overhaul of the gearbox. But
so you don't have a time period on that?
That's going to be a long time. I mean, let's just say 1,000 hours, but it's probably going to be 2,000. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And then the engine? I know our engines now last forever.
I just reluctant to say that I believe it's going to go 4,000 hours, because but I think it will.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it did.
Well, what we've got now is we have people at 1,600 hours. And then we have got Dave doing 700 hours in 3 years, and he's flying to every state in the country. And since he started flying the engine, like I was trying to prove earlier, that those platinum / iridium plugs will last for 1,000 hours. Okay, so everything has changed. The thing about the engine that people might not realize, because not everybody reads about engines every day. We've got other things to do, and in fact, when you buy a new car, trying to figure out what's going on with the engine is like on page 54. They don't even show you the engine. The salesperson is going to show you the, Everybody cares about cup holders and neon lighting underneath the dash and all this other stuff. But what is going on in the engine, if you guys want to know, is that there's all kinds of stuff that has happened in the last 10, 15 years. One thing is they refer to it as friction reduction technology. And that obviously has to do with EPA and environmental and making the engine smoother and better and less maintenance. And it goes all the way from the 020 oil that makes the engine operate with less friction, to coatings of the pistons, special piston rings, very short piston skirts, grooved bearings that carry the oil much better throughout the engine, offset crankshaft to cylinders to make the engine turn easier, because it's only making power on one side. There's lots of things, and then obviously these engines have variable valve timing and variable valve lift and all that, and somebody will say, oh, we don't need that in aviation because it's always at the same RPM and all that, and that's baloney. It is not. We don't fly exactly underneath the same circumstances all the time. And if you add a variable pitch prop, that's even further from the truth. The engine, like the way we operate our propeller, if we have a variable, is we have maximum throttle all the time. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean maximum power. It just means that there's no metal piece that restricts the air from going into the airplane engine. So then you can use the propeller to govern the amount of power that you're taking out of the engine, and because you're not closing the butterfly valve, you're getting this 5 to 6% gain in efficiency from lack of pumping losses, they call it, in the engine. So between friction reduction, no pumping losses, using the propeller to change RPM and loading on the engine, and the engine taking care of where the valves are going to be, where the timing is going to be, all that kind of stuff. You do need an engine that is infinitely variable to maximize efficiency, even in an airplane.
Interesting. I'm thinking, so we talked a lot about the gearbox. The turbocharger's only on one of them. And by the way, I guess the gearboxes are They're not the same though, right? Each engine type has a different gearbox.
They're very similar.
But they're similar.
They're similar. They have different bearings to handle different loads.
Okay. I want to talk about the turbocharger then, which is only on the 195 horsepower. Obviously, in airplanes, we're using turbochargers for different reasons in cars. We want to be able to maintain power at altitudes that a car would never reach. So how do you operate that turbocharger? Is it normalized, extra boot? What are we doing?
Well, let me cover that, like the whole thing, and I'm going to try to be brief, but there's a lot to it. Like the turbochargers you see, like when you fly your Piper Aztec, and you look out the window at night, and you see this glowing thing in the nacelle next to you. Okay, so that's a turbocharger that's bolted to an air-cooled engine, which has huge drawbacks. If you turbocharge an air-cooled engine, the only thing that can cool the turbocharger is oil. Okay, and then you don't have an engine that's set up to have a turbocharger being bolted directly to the engine. So you have to use a lot of exhaust pipes that are slip fit that have to all come together to one location in order to use that exhaust gas to power the turbocharger. So in this installation, all that goes away. You take an inline 4-cylinder engine, the turbocharger can go, you cast the exhaust manifold into the cylinder head, then you use coolant to cool that. So, and then you take the turbocharger and you bolt it right to the cylinder head, which is a very small oval port in the middle, rather than having the turbo hanging off the side of the engine on cast iron or welded up tubing, which has to expand and contract and will eventually crack. So between cooling the exhaust gases in the intake manifold several hundred degrees before it hits the turbocharger, and then cooling the turbocharger with liquid and oil, you have a very refined and modern turbocharger system that you now can control with an actuator that is controlled by the computer that runs the engine. And because the turbocharger run cooler, your intercooler can be smaller, because even though you can run up to 20 pounds of boost, which is like a ridiculous 70 inches of manifold pressure, the charge from the outlet of the turbocharger is cooler, which means smaller intercooler, which means less drag to the airplane, and on and on and on. So just because turbochargers are hated in the aviation industry right now, as in I would never buy a 210 with a turbocharger ever again because my maintenance went, skyrocketed. That's not true with modern installations of liquid cooled turbos.
That's really interesting. I love that. Now, are you normalizing it? In other words, keeping sea level pressure, and what's my critical altitude?
You could never make 195 horsepower of a 1.5 liter engine unless you boosted it all the time.
Okay,
so the
and
engine,
that's what the car people want to do.
Yeah, that engine runs under boost pretty much all the time. You can have maximum torque at 1500 RPM, engine RPM. So it's always under boost, and yeah, so it's not normalized. Basically, but you can go to 20,000 feet, and the engine, it all depends on how big of an intercooler you put on it, as far as going up into altitude, like you're asking.
Okay, great. Let's pass the mic to Dave. So we talked about reliability and service on the road. You've got a lot of time on this thing. Sounds like you may be one of the high-time guys. You said you're kind of a beta tester.
Yeah,
What issues have you had?
I've had really zero. I consider myself the unofficial test pilot to destroy this thing. So within that, when they have a first flight, for instance, somebody's going to take their plane for a first flight, they'll say, "Hey Dave, are you available?" And if I am, I'll go fly out there, and we'll go over the other person's plane, inspect and everything else. And at one occasion, that's what I did. I was flying out there to go give two people some demo rides. They were building a similar project, actually identical. So I landed after a rainstorm on a very slick, lychee-packed runway, and as I was taxiing in, I hit the perfect pothole and broke all my propellers. So I was like, oh man, Well, fortunately, it's very interchangeable. Jan was there, he inspected the gearbox. Bill was there, he had a new prop system. Everything was good, we put it back on, I flew out that weekend. So it's very interchangeable in that sense. So with that, the reliability of me flying reliability of me flying is that I have the confidence to fly literally anywhere in this country, knowing that I can have any part 24 hours shipped to me, and I don't have to take my wings off and bring the vehicle back. Or because as we're growing, we're developing a very family-friendly network, which we do fly to other people's places now for the weekend, sometimes very impromptu. All of a sudden, several planes show up. But having that sort of friendship, knowing that if somebody flies to my airport, for instance, and something happens to their plane, I'll take a part off my plane, get them back home, and they'll just ship it back and it'll be all be done. So we have a lot of friends, a lot of family in this, but the reliability of it is unless you hit that perfect pothole, you can pretty much fly anywhere you want.
Okay, how about integration with all the glass cockpit stuff we got? I mean, it talks to Dynon, Garmin, they know how to read everything. You mentioned something about gearbox temperature, which that's just another widget. What else is a pilot monitoring on this particular engine that's different than what you would consider a traditional aircraft engine?
I think first off, we integrate with everything. Everything on the engine is just sensors. So Dynon, Garmin, MGL, any avionics company, it's as simple as the 1/8 inch NPT you're putting in and just plugging right into the engine,
Okay.
and then it's going to read all the engine information.
So what am I reading as a pilot? Everybody's used to CHT and EGT and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
What do you guys read?
That's all out the door now. So you're not even monitoring any of that stuff. So you'll be monitoring your gearbox temperature, your coolant temperature, your oil pressure, and your fuel pressure, along with your voltage and stuff of that nature. When it comes to the turbo engine, you obviously have intercooler inlet and outlet temperatures and manifold pressure and stuff like that, because it's you have more things to monitor. But outside of that, that's really it. And you're running on your RPMs, and then you're good to go.
Which RPM am I reading? Engine or prop RPM?
You're reading engine RPM.
Okay. So you got to come up with a number. Well, you guys give them the limits, I guess.
Well, yes and no. Whereas in like a Rotax, they run at 5,600, 5,800, and they don't want you to go below a certain amount. It's not good for the engine. You can't run really low RPMs. And I can pass this along to Dave as well, but I think he's been anywhere from 3,000 RPM to 5,000 RPM, depending on what he's trying to do, whether he's climbing out. You have those capabilities across that span.
He's trying to show off at the stoplight.
Yeah.
So I know Rotaxes, since you brought them up, it's kind of a long time to get that oil warmed up. So from start to takeoff is...
By the time,
What are we doing there?
I got a little thing on that, and that's remember I was saying about the integral exhaust manifold, so that to cool the turbocharger. Well, that also directly hooks up to your heater lines. So within 20 seconds of the engine starting, because the exhaust is instantly hot. There's no such thing as waiting for exhaust to get hot, because it's firing the engine, right? Well, that exhaust is now heating that jacket around the exhaust, and that means that you can have instant heat from the coolant because you're tapping off right there to do the coolant. But that was an indirect thing that you said. But how long? Yeah, okay. So you can go and fly. You can go and fly as soon as your your coolant is like 100 degrees or something like that. There's no real limitation to that, and that comes back to the engine doesn't change a lot, and it doesn't grow or contract as much as traditional engines, because it's a very, very small amount of temperature change from running at idle and running at full power.
Well, that's the benefit of a liquid-cooled engine over the air-cooled. I mean, that's a compromise for air-cooled.
Right, and that's what Alyssa was saying. Like, there's only like 3 sensors on the engine. You don't have to monitor, like running an air-cooled engine is kind of like running, if it's a 4-cylinder, it's like running 4 separate engines. That's why every cylinder is being monitored separately, and because you have a liquid-cooled engine with the same jacket and the same coolant to cool on all the cylinders, that all goes out the window.
Yeah, that's great. Tell you what, I bet we've got a bunch of questions out
Yeah,
here.
that sounds
We've
good.
kind of gone to the end of our time. I don't mind staying here. We've used up a lot because you got so much great information. But do we have time to take on a few
Oh,
questions?
yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any other information we can give that might help the questioners? Dave?
You were mentioning RPMs, what we fly at. And I do extensive testing. I have Excel spreadsheets. I've tested this thing every way I can think of. And what I find is I'll take off. I'm at sea level over there in Houston, so I take off at 5,800 RPMs, and I have tested it all the way up to 12,000 full power the whole way. So I know it'll do that. Normally I'll level off either pattern altitude or whatever altitude. And my most efficient cruise RPM is 4552 precisely. I can go faster, but it's just diminishing returns on the fuel economy. So a lot of my flying is sightseeing mode, or in this case coffee mode. And I've had it down as low as 2.7 gallons an hour, flaperons down, and I'm just sightseeing, burning next to nothing, close to, was it 2.8 gallons an hour? Something like that. So I can stay up a very long time.
I'm glad you brought up the fuel burn thing because I think that'll definitely help. I'm sure that's a question we're going to have out here. Can you compare that to, am I going to burn less gas with this engine versus something else? In other words, that would depend on,
Yeah.
the results would be because it's more efficient.
Yeah, and the direct injection definitely helps on that because of the way the fuel is sprayed onto the cylinders.
Yeah.
So that's a big benefit to everything that we do. Now, just like anything, it's all relative to where
Right, it
you're
takes
at.
so much gas to make so much horsepower.
So I mean, a lot of the engines of the same horsepower are going to burn about the same fuel, but we tend to come in quite a bit more efficient with that. And with the variable pitch prop like Dave has, you're even more efficient from there. So.
Excellent. So now I'm saving a little bit of money on the cost of the fuel and maybe burning a little bit less gas. Don't have to change the plugs. It's getting kind of nice sounding. So, yeah, Dave.
There's a reason I have 700 hours on this plane in less than 3 years. It's efficient to fly.
Yeah, and the fact that you got 700 means you didn't have any downtime. Yeah. Can we go to questions now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Holler it out a little bit. If I can't hear you real good, I'll walk up and give you a microphone, but we'll try it from here. Lucian.
You were talking about constant speed prop versus ground adjustable versus adjustable in the cockpit.
The props.
Yeah, when I look at other airplanes, to get a constant speed prop, there's a huge weight penalty and a cost penalty. So what is that in comparison from the Lycoming constant speed to your prop?
Good question. So he wanted to know if I go with a constant speed prop, if I got a weight or cost penalty that you see on a typical Lycoming.
When it comes to a lot of people, an Airmaster or something like that is something that's commonly compared. Obviously, it has a bit more complexity and stuff in the spinner, as discussed earlier. So you have a bit more maintenance. Whereas I think Dave has like 500 or 600 hours behind this particular propeller. You're not really maintaining much to start. And I think all up, you're around 15 to 17 pounds with the Duke propeller that we offer. Part of that being because it's also a carbon hub. Everything's really lightweight. The way we run it makes it super lightweight because we don't have all those extra components. And the Airmaster comes in increasingly, it's a lot more. It's around 30 pounds by the time you have an Airmaster prop up there. So
How
there's
about the
definitely
cost part of it?
Well, just the cost is, it is more costly initially to buy a variable pitch prop that in 2 years you're gonna make it back in fuel.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a lot of other advantages. You can add in pitch. It gets quieter. The propeller is more efficient. We talk about the engine, but the engine gets more efficient the more pitch you put in the propeller, because the propeller gets more efficient as a unit. The whole thing becomes more efficient. But as far as comparing it to metal Hartzell propeller, all that, there's no comparison. I mean, these are experimental propellers that are the latest and greatest in technology. They're, like Alyssa was saying, carbon fiber forged hub, carbon fiber blades, super lightweight. The weight, I mean, weighs nothing, and yeah, it's more affordable than other propellers of similar design out there, experimental ones, and most of that comes from if you try to do an electric propeller, for instance, and you have to put a motor and a gearbox in the spinner to drive it from the front back. All those components are very expensive because they have to be very light and very, very strong. And also there are little issues that have to be ironed out, and they're always troublesome no matter what, where that little motor in the spinner is spinning, so the little brushes tend to have more power or tighter springs on them, which wears things faster, and it just snowballs. And then you have the brushes to transfer power to the propeller. And that's all gone with our design because we have just a steel rod through the gearbox, and we have just a regular inline actuator next to the engine that's completely easily maintained or replaced or whatever. So there's very little mechanism in the propeller itself.
Okay. Up front here in the blue.
Exhaust and muffling.
Exhaust what?
And the muffler.
What about the
Sound
exhaust and
reduction.
muffler?
Sound reduction, muffling, exhaust systems.
I'm gonna have to get a little closer to the helicopter noise. So the question was,
Talk about the exhaust.
oh, just talk about it. Yeah, he wants to know, okay, the exhaust system and the muffler system.
Okay, so there's several things about that. Now, one thing that I've discovered from working on an inline four-cylinder engine is that it is an inline engine. Now, the beauty of that is there are no exhaust pipes running everywhere in the engine compartment. You don't have to tie 4 or 6 cylinders together with a whole bunch of piping underneath the engine. So that enables you that reduces your maintenance. You don't have slip joints that can leak, and you can breathe exhaust in the cabin. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, again, the integral exhaust manifold we keep bringing up allows you then to have either a turbocharger or a very simple muffler in one location. And that's what we do on the non-turbos. It's on the other side. You guys are viewing it. It's a muffler that is very simple. It's very compact. It doesn't produce a lot of heat in the engine compartment because it's in one location. And it's you combine that with the now if you take that, it's quieter than a traditional airplane. But if you now take that and you put a turbocharger on, it is ridiculously quiet. I mean, they think we're an electric airplane. That's not so much true if you have a fixed pitch propeller and you have a regular muffler, then it's just a little bit quieter than a traditional airplane. Now, if you have a combination of turbocharger and variable pitch prop where you can run a lot of boost and very low RPM, it gets crazy quiet. If you have the turbocharger, if you have normally aspirated, but you have a variable pitch, then you can take the advantage of reducing propeller noise by adding pitch to the blades, which quiets down the propeller, slows down the engine, reduces noise from the muffler. So yeah, it's a complex thing of a variety of things that end up being the final noise coming from the engine. But in general, our engines are incredibly quiet.
Do they all have mufflers?
They all have mufflers.
Okay, interesting. Blue shirt?
Does the engine provide the heat for inside the cabin for the winter?
Yeah,
Where do I get cabin heat? Is the question.
Right, and that's we touched on that earlier, that integral exhaust manifold, and you would use that. You would put a heater core in your cabin. We don't like to run rubber hoses into the airplane, so we, just like in most cars, the heater core has the aluminum or copper tubes coming out of it, and you would make grommets and stick them through the firewall and then hook up your hoses outside, and then inside, and that's where you would run your hot coolant. And then inside the cabin you would have a heat exchanger that would be around those tubes, and a fan and a switch.
So just like a car, man.
It's just like a car,
Okay.
and we have heaters available.
Can I put an air conditioner on
Yes.
it? We live in Texas.
What I've learned about that is that it's a lot cheaper and lighter to work on ventilation and make lots of vents in the airplane, so that when you because the air conditioning thing is heavy. Yes, you can put a compressor on, but it's heavy. It puts loads on the serpentine belt. It can take out other components on the engine if you break the belt. There's a lot of reasons why you should not do it. And what I've found is that because you have a liquid-cooled engine and you don't have to worry about it getting too hot sitting on the ground, as soon as you put your butt in the seat, you start the engine. The first thing you do. So either you leave the doors open or you work on ventilation rather than installing air conditioning.
Yeah, there you go. I was just thinking about stuff I got in my car, so, cool. Questions? More questions?
Where do you get your engine cores?
Sorry, I was listening to the wrong.
That's okay, I got it. He asked where do we get the engine cores. I can elaborate on that. It's a little more in depth, but it's actually quite simple. Honda does not sell engine cores to anybody. They will not do it. They'll sell you all the pieces and parts if you want to put it together yourself, and it'll cost you $30,000-$40,000. So how we do that is just like Dave's engine here. He had like 6 or 7 miles on it. 8 miles. That's what he had on his engine when he received it. The gentleman over in our booth had 10. So we do that by insurance claims. A lot of times you'll have like vehicles that are on a train that gets derailed and they don't actually touch the engines, but they have to be sold in insurance. It's an insurance claim. So we wind up taking those engines and pulling them or getting them out of the car, which means we have a brand new engine that is built by Honda. It's a 2021. We don't use old cores and stuff like that. We're not remanufacturing anything. We're not opening it up and tearing it down, and that's how we get it. And because there's so many vehicles on the road, we really do have an endless supply of anything and everything that we need, and that keeps your parts exactly as they need.
So does the manufacturer change the engine much? You know, body styles change regularly. We still dealing with the same engine we had 5 years ago, or what?
Yeah, this one's been around for about 8 years, and
Okay.
our turbo engine's been around for about 6, and will be around for many, many more. Obviously, like anything, they do change their engines, and when they do, we kind of move forward in doing that. Many years ago, we had what was called a Viking 110, and we still have about 400 of those out flying around. But that was this engine before it was direct injected and on its side.
Okay.
And we still, because a lot of our parts are used across all of our engines, so all those parts are available, just like you can still go get your old Chevy piece that you need at any auto parts store. All the other parts we still have. So none of that really changes. Even though maybe we change or introduce more models, your part availability, your maintenance, and everything all remains the same.
Okay, so you follow Hale Street.
A little bit.
Yeah, that engine.
Yeah, so it really enables us, like I said, because there's so many cars out there, there's an endless supply of anything and everything we want underneath the specifications that we would like.
That's neat. That's right. I'm glad you asked that question. On the top of the bench here,
Does ethanol, is that an issue at all?
ethanol?
No, not really. You can use, most of the time, most people are just using premium pump gas, non-ethanol, or it's not ethanol free. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I know the road taxes, for example, they want it to be ethanol free. It doesn't really matter. If your airplane's going to sit for 6 or 7 months or something, obviously drain it and put 100 low lead in it to stabilize it, or drain it completely.
Yeah, that's one issue, that airplanes probably don't get flown as much as your car gets driven. But I mean, the engine was designed to burn the ethanol fuel. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of it sitting around coming up and all those other issues with ethanol.
Yeah, so just premium pump gas is really what it's still an airplane engine. Don't go try to find the cheapest gas around that's been sitting around at a gas station with the degradation of low-grade fuels.
Well, Dave can talk to that. Doing 48 states in 10 days. How was access to car gas?
Finding car gas at airports to me was extremely difficult. I only located 3 places in the entire country that on my route had auto fuel. The rest was courtesy car and donations.
So that means he took a siphon with him, and if you've ever gone to an airport and the courtesy car was out of gas, you know David been there.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, can you carry a plastic jug with you and
I
get
carry-
the courtesy car? And
I don't know if you can see through the door there, but on the passenger seat is a 5-gallon jerry can, which I named Wilson. So he flies along with me.
you and Tom, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just get a courtesy car, and on this trip it was usually no more than 2 trips.
Sure.
I got 10 gallons, and that got us to the next destination to get fuel.
Cool. Jan's got something here about the gas.
Yeah, since we're talking gasoline, don't let the thing that, you have to run to a gas station to get gas that scare you away from using a modern engine, because that's all changing. It used to be, we said 10 years ago that, 100 low lead's going to disappear, and it still hasn't, but the fact is that right now that is changing. The lead will disappear. Several fuels are being approved by the FAA right now, and they're non-leaded substitutions for 100 low lead. So that's all. Yeah, and like Alyssa said, we actually contacted like Swift Fuel after the fact to see if they would, or we left them a message and they never got our message, but they would have also been maybe able to like help us and sponsor us, because Swift Fuel already has gasoline around the country, and this is coming more and more and more every day, that you're going to find non-leaded fuel on your route. And if you can, you use the additive, so it's just going to get better as far as the availability. In fact, buying something that might need 100 low lead might be the scary thing right now.
Listen.
I wanted to elaborate slightly on that. Obviously, he had very specific points that he needed to go to make this trip done as quickly as possible and do that. But we travel every year from Florida to Mexico, Missouri. If you plan your route, you can find the MoGas at plenty of airports and stuff like that. So that's kind of a non-issue. And like you said, if you don't, you put the 100 low lead in and you use that Declan additive, which all of us experimental engines outside of the Continentals and Lycomings, we all have to use. Lead is not great for it, so you use that additive when you need to. Other than that, you use MoGas, and you can save a few bucks, and it's better on your engine.
Excellent. Oh, up top, blue shirt.
Higher horsepower, right? That's what you said, yes?
Yeah.
At this time, no. A lot of that comes down to, in the experimental market, there's not really a huge need for anything outside of what we already offer. And when you get up into those higher horsepowers, you're looking at a very large amount of redoing R&D that we've already done. It's very easy to go low in horsepower. High in horsepower, we start looking at a lot of R&D, and it'd be years and years and years before we even release it into the market and put those kind of testing hours on something that was needed.
Sounds good. Yeah, 200 horsepower effectively, 195. I mean, that's going to power everything except for 4-seat airplanes out there.
Yeah.
The larger.
And we even have like the Zenith 801s, which are 4 seats, that they fly behind the 195 turbo, and it still performs incredibly due to the thrust that the actual engine creates.
That's more. It's more horsepower than any production aircraft would have.
And even new 4-seat airplanes that are coming out, like the RV-15 and the Sling,
Yeah.
they're based on the smaller. Maybe the 15 might need like the 195, but the Sling, they carry 4 people with the 915 Rotax, which our 150 will handle.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment, by the way. They had, if y'all didn't see it, Sling. They just brought 3 their new high wing aircraft all the way from Johannesburg up here to the air show. That's
a haul.
That is a haul. So that airplane was built or designed specifically for long range. And have you made any inroads with them for them to use your engine?
I mean, we always have people that approach us with certain things like that, but until somebody actually is ready to follow through,
Yeah.
we absolutely can. It'll definitely fit the platform and it'll perform well.
Cool.
But until someone wants to do that,
Great.
not at this time.
Well, I think we might need to wrap it up, and I don't any one really pressing question. if you do have it, their booth is, I mean, we're 20 feet away from them.
Yeah.
Even a putt from me, maybe. So, I just want to thank you guys for coming out. We stayed a little bit extra long, but I learned a lot myself. I hope you all did too. And it's, you know, the concept of automotive engines and airplanes has been around for a long time, but we've got a lot of them that were left in the dust for various reasons. But you guys have how many engines out there flying now?
We actually have 1,200 engines out in the
1,200?
field. I'd say about 75% of those are flying. The others are still building.
Okay.
You know, stuff. We have cozies and stuff. They
So we're
take a while.
talking 1,000 engines. That's
Yeah.
we're critical mass, I think.
Oh yeah. I think, you know, when people have the idea that high RPMs and can't work in aircraft and they're never going to last, they were not meant to do that. I think after the past 13 or so years doing the Honda specifically, you wind up proving that that is in fact not the case. So
Yeah.
people stop questioning things like that and realizing that it can do exactly what we said it could do.
Great. Well, how about a round of applause for Jan and Listen? Dave, I think they gave us a lot of good information. Yeah, definitely want to learn more myself. So, what's your website that I can learn without
Yeah.
having to call you?
Yeah, you can obviously call or even text us anytime. We respond any old way. But www.vikingaircraftengines.com, and you can find all our information there and even watch a bunch of installation videos if you want.
Do you have any other social media access?
Yeah, we do Viking Aircraft Engines on Facebook. We have groups with Viking engine owners and prospects. We have an Instagram. So all of that is heavily monitored. We're always there. And the group that we have, the Viking engine owners and prospects, is really wonderful because if we are not available that second, you have, like Dave tried to say, we're a family. That's you.
Good.
When you buy a Viking engine, you've been welcomed into the Viking family, and we're all here to help each other.
Well, maybe happy customers could post a TikTok dance,
I
celebration
can
dance.
see
or
it coming soon. Yeah.
something. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, guys, and appreciate y'all coming. We got 2 more episodes of Home Builds and Review tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock. In fact, we're going to hear about that Sling aircraft at 1 o'clock, how they made it from Johannesburg here to Oshkosh. Thanks a lot. Have a great air show. See y'all later.